All right, we will reconvene in open session at about 5:25. And we have no reportable actions from closed session. Could you please join me for the flag? Ready, salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome everyone. Do we have any public comments concerning items on the agenda? Comments concerning items not on the agenda? Okay, we'll move right into action items. Action item number 1. Mr. Calvin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Lori. The first thing we've got is a short PowerPoint just to go over some of the points that we've made in previous either board study sessions or board meetings. Just a brief history. Within SFID 3, Measure J authorized $60 million. We let contracts approximately $40 million for phases 1 and 3. Spring of 11, we realized that because of lower AVs and maybe overly optimistic projections initially, that we could only issue $30 million or so under Prop 39 limitations, which is $25 per $100,000 of assessed value. And at that time, rather than use extremely expensive and non-callable capital appreciation bonds, commonly called CABs, for that required $10 million to finish those projects, you all elected and authorized us to issue bond anticipation notes, or BANs, in September of 2011 in the amount of $11.5 million plus fees. That was 2 years ago. You can issue bans for up to 5 years. You do it initially in a 2-year increment, and after that you can go for 3 if they're still needed. Those first 2 year bans come due this September, so obviously we've got to make a decision here. We've talked in the past about tackling this issue with a combination of strategies and actions, because our assessed values still are not to the point where we can issue the entire $12 million through GO bonds. So here are a few of the things that we've talked about doing. The first is to take cash available in the amount of $4 million and pay it down. We have $2 million in unspent ban funds from Measure J. I verified that yesterday. We've still got just above $2 million that's been set aside, squirreled away for this purpose. We've also got $2 million in reimbursements from the city of Tulare. All the cash is not here. We've got half the cash in. We're due for another $500,000 payment early this fall, and the final $500,000 payment early spring of 14. But we've got $2 million in either cash or commitments from the city of Tulare. So together, those two $2 million pieces, we can pay down the bans by $4 million, leaving us about $8.5 million that needs to be dealt with. The options, which I'll get to in a moment, would include extending the bans for another 3 years, either the entire remaining $8.5 million or a portion thereof. That would allow us time for a number of things to happen, including revisit the reauthorization strategy that we considered in November of 12. You'll recall that our consultant had 12 other districts in the state that passed those reauthorization strategies. It would also give us time to develop a 3-year partial repayment plan using year-end unspent budget. Maybe on an annual basis, we'd set aside half of what fell through from our budget as unspent. It might come up with as much as $500,000 a year for 3 years towards this. We could also consider selling district assets to pay a portion of the bands, and certainly that final piece is COP, certificate of participation. If we went the entire $8.5 million, we're talking about $800,000 a year for 25 years. So that's not a great option to do the entire piece. I want to talk a little bit about AB 182 before I show the three scenarios that we've come into, that we've come with tonight, because AB 182 does factor into the strategies that we're looking at. This is in response to Poway School District and others who have used very expensive capital appreciation bonds to the tune of even greater than what was proposed here 2 years ago. There are some districts with very large amounts that are 10, 12, 15 to 1 payback ratios. AB 182 is being authored and proposed to deal with that phenomenon that we've seen. They've talked about an 8% maximum interest rate. They've talked about a maximum of 4 to 1 payback ratio. What's being kicked around a little bit is initially the author said that the series itself, any one series, Series A, Series B, Series C, any one series would be 4 to 1. I think there's been a friendly revision to it from some lobbyist groups. I think the author may use it, and that is they may change it to a 4 to 1 payback ratio on the entire authorization, which would mean the entire SFID number 3 would be under a 4 to 1 payback ratio. But frankly, we've still tried to live within the original spirit of the law, which was a 4 to 1 payback ratio on the series, as opposed to the authorization. A 30-year maximum term, and then any CAVs used should be callable or refinanceable after 10 years. In the past, they haven't had that requirement. So even though this is not law yet, it's only being kicked around and rumored to be becoming law in January 14. We have still done our best to try to put together some proposals that, for the most part, met these parameters. So with that, I'd like to switch over to my Elmo. And since John said he can't help me here, I'll push this button. So before I get into the options, I wanted to put this graph up because at our last board meeting, there were some questions about sort of how bond financing works and why is it so different than a home loan. And the difference is especially significant when the bond came through a Prop 39 election that limits community colleges to $25 per $100,000 assessed value. And when those assessed values start to reduce, your ability to issue bonds just goes down, obviously. What this shows in the yellow is our initial Series A in SFID 3. And you can see, let's see if I can move this over a little bit. It was for a total of $20 million. Over here, that was February of 2009. We issued $20 million. And that's represented by the yellow. And so essentially, taxpayers will pay $20 per $100,000 assessed through the year 2032. But again, that $20 million is only a third of what we were authorized for. And so when we came back with Series B, we didn't have here to here to play with. We had here to work with. So you can see Series B used that $4 or $5 to the best of their ability to get current interest bonds, and then slid into some longer capital appreciation bonds, and nevertheless still stayed within acceptable parameters for the use of CAVs. But now that we need an additional 8.5 million in general obligation bonds, we don't have much to work with. We have just maybe a little bit here. There's a question with the county and the amount they're holding back for a reserve. We'll be able to squeak a little bit into current interest bonds and then in this area, but we really hesitate to go too much further than this because again, this is about the 30-year cutoff right here. So what we're essentially working with the 30-year cutoff is this entire piece, this white piece, and then any piece in here we can squeeze in once the county stops building up their reserve. Does that make some sense for folks, kind of understanding where Series A and Series B went and kind of how that locks us out of doing much in the current 20 or 30 years? So what we're left with is 3 options, and I'll just come back to scenario 3 here in a moment, because I don't think that's the one that the board will be drawn to first. Scenario 1 ends up giving us I think there's one more sheet that I'd like to get up there. I'll explain it over there.
This is your 3 scenarios.
Yeah, but this sheet is not the same sheet that I made my notes on. That was.
Give me 1 minute, I'll get the front page because I think it explains it a little bit better.
Yeah.
So when I hear 11 and a half to 12 and a half, is that $1 million difference pretty much the interest we accrued? Because sometimes we'll say 11 and a half, and sometimes I hear 12 and a half. Is that the difference? Because we really have 11 and a half in bond anticipation notes, right? And we're going to accrue interest and then maybe another $500,000. Is that correct to say? Because every now and then he'll throw out 12 and a half million. I don't want to assume something that's not right.
Well, my notes show 12 million, and we're using 4 million, so that leaves us to finance 8.5 million. Well, so 12.5 minus 4, 8.5 million. You'll see under scenario 2 that the total that we need to do something with is about 8.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm $1 million off. If we take the 4, if we owe 11 and a half, I'm thinking that's got to be interest. Because it's showing 11 and a half, but then we're going to use $4 million, right? So my math isn't coming out right.
Yeah, 11.5 was the band's original issue.
Right. But I keep hearing 11.5, not 12.5, and the difference there is $3 million off 4. I'm assuming that's going to be interest, right? That's only a $3 million difference, but we're going to pay down 4. Is that really going to be all interest, the difference? See what I'm saying? Right, we're going to pay down 4, so we'll put up there.
I think
What sheet are you using?
That sheet.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, it's broken down.
Let's see, it's one, two back, and then you and John. Sorry about that, guys. I think this is the.
Brent, real quick,
Yes.
I'm showing, and this $1 million, maybe I'm just missing it. We're showing, we have a band of 11.5, correct?
The 2011 band on this sheet shows 11.5 million.
And if we pay down 4, we keep talking 8.5 million, not 7.5. Is the million interest?
Yes.
$1 million of it is interest by the time we get ready to do something.
And fees.
In fees, okay, all right, because that's $1 million difference. I keep thinking we're down 7.5, and then you say 8.5. Okay, good.
So we've got three three scenarios here. And you can see in scenario one, the goal was to split it up $4.5 million to general obligation bonds and roll over $4 million in a bond anticipation note. The interest rate is 6.19% overall. The financing term would be 30 years. It'd be a 4.4 to 1 debt ratio. All the capital appreciation bonds would be callable. Again, you can see it meets most of the proposed language in AB 182, but not all. Scenario 2 would meet all of them. It's a 4 to 1 debt ratio, 30 years, 6.11% overall, about the same amount in current interest bonds, and a little bit less in convertible capital appreciation bonds, which obviously leaves a larger band for us to repay. We'd be rolling over $4 3/4 million, payable in 3 years at $5.25 million. So obviously we need in either of those two, we need a pretty big strategy for what to do with it in 3 years. It's not just about kicking the can down the road, we have to have a strategy. Before we have that conversation, and I think that's where maybe some of our dialogue should focus on is what would be the plan to address these bans. We could look at scenario 3, which obviously, if we could do most or all these in current interest bonds, and we didn't have all the yellow ink and the blue ink I showed you earlier, this would be the way to go, to take it all out right now. The challenge there is clear that now this, when I talked earlier about Prop 182 and wrestling with, well, is it the 4 to 1 requirement on a series or on the entire authorization? This assumes that requirement is on the authorization. And it would only end up being a 3.75 to 1 payback for the entire authorization. But for this series, it would be 6 1/3 for Series C. And besides that, when you get into these numbers, they're pretty ugly. They've got regular cabs in there at an 8 to 1, which is essentially what we saw 2 springs ago when we decided to use the bans in the first place. And then the convertible cabs are 5.5 to 1. And so that entire series would involve $46 million in interest, 6.3 to 1 payback. And certainly that's something for the board to look at and consider. Just judging from how fiscally conservative the board has been in the past, our guess was that this would not be their top choice. So save maybe that conversation for a moment. We can get back and discuss some of the ideas that we've had for if in fact we did go with scenario 1 or scenario 2, and at the end of 3 years we knew we were going to have a $4.5 to $5 million ban due with no option to extend the bond anticipation notes. We'd have to have a pretty solid plan for paying it back. Obviously 2 years ago, losing the kind of money we were losing, $4 million in 1 year, was not the climate for trying to pay back bans or setting aside funds to pay back a ban. We're anticipating that the climate is a little bit better. Today, put together a plan for paying back a partial piece of it through our general fund. And we've talked as I said earlier, about shifting as much as $500,000 in unspent budget at the end of those 3 years towards this effort. But that will still leave anywhere from $3.5 to $4 million for us to deal with. We've talked about the possibility of looking at district assets, whether it's some of the reserves that we have from the sale of the Linwood Farm, whether it's the parking lot across the street and some of the ideas that have been kicked around for turning that into a revenue stream. There's also obviously land in Tulare that, if not sold, I mean, certainly selling that land, selling a piece of the land could pay for this as well. But we could also turn that land through some kind of a joint venture into a revenue stream that could service the debt on a COP or some other debt instrument. And in that scenario, we'd be able to keep the property. We would just be partners in some sort of a development or something like that. Those are some of the ideas that we kicked around today. Anything else you want to add to that in terms of the ideas?
No, I think those were the ones that we've talked the most about. And I think we could put together a plan. We'd have a 3-year period of time really to figure that out. And maybe it's some combination of those, rather than considering one or all of them as the sole solution, rather than having it all be one-time money out of the general fund, or all be from the sale of an asset, or all of it be from some sort of a revenue stream project, that it's a combination of those three.
The other thing we should mention is that we wouldn't resign ourselves to the fact that AVs are never going up, or that there would not be legislation amending Prop 39, because we are certainly not the only district that's fighting this kind of battle. So in 3 years, there could be something break, either with our assessed values, where we could issue more GO bonds. There's the reauthorization strategy in November of 14. And then there's also the possibility of Prop 39 being changed, tweaked. Even AB 182 is said to include a provision for asking for waivers. Even after AB 182, if it were passed, there's currently a waiver in there that would allow districts that have existing bond anticipation notes, if they had to, work outside of the parameters I showed earlier in order to pay off a bond anticipation note. So we're not necessarily locked in by those parameters. But like I showed you earlier, I think this board would like to work within the parameters of 182 to the extent they can anyway.
Brett, just how confident are we that if we chose, say, scenario number 2, which to me seems the most plausible, and I can give my reasons why later, but how confident are we with your discussions with the consultants that if this is the plan that we chose, that they could take it to fruition and we don't get another setback of some sort for things that are happening in the financial markets or that sort of thing?
Well, we asked him that exact same question a little more directly yesterday, and he's confident, they're confident, Piper Jaffray and Dale Scott are confident, but the interest rates screaming up in the last month has gotten them shook up a bit too. He gave us several reasons why he thinks they've stabilized now, at least for the next few weeks. But he does think that we need to be prepared if we're going to go this direction. We need to be prepared within the next couple of weeks, and then kind of rate shop a little bit and try to time the market to get in at this. But
to me, it seems like if under scenario 2, we're within the limits, if not the spirit of the law of the 182. And so if markets changed and somehow that ratio went over, the kickback would be maybe the bands would increase from 4.7 million to some other number. Is that our fallback position in some way?
It is. One of two things obviously are going to move a little bit. If we did not want the 4-to-1 ratio to move at all, and interest rates went up, then this might go down, which would cause this to go up.
Right.
And so, you know, if this went to 4, this goes to 5, and then this ends up being 5.5 million, something like that. We could also, you know, if we had a tolerance to go 4.2 here, 4.2 or 4.3 here, then maybe we could lock in at getting that number. Just kind of depends on what we want. We want to lock in a dollar amount, or we want to lock in at the 4-to-1.
Well, as I recall, our first two Series A and Series B had a ratio of 2.5 to 1. So that's seems to be a reasonable and not excessive ratio, which brings our overall ratio, you know, down to what you say here, the 3.75, I think, on your other.
Well, the 3.75,
Or the.
it would take us doing everything in geobonds to bring
Oh, right,
to bring our
right,
2.5 up to 3.75.
Right, our overall ratio would be well below the.
Well below our
Well
authorization.
below 4, well below 4 in total.
Yeah,
Right.
it may creep to 3, and really either of those scenarios.
Well, to me, if you look at option 1 and compare it to option 2, the big difference I see is in order to limit the ban to $4 million from 4.7 million in scenario 2, you're paying $5 million more over the life of those convertible bonds. So not only is your ratio, you know, 4.4 to 1, you know, you're paying $5 million more in interest, and all you're doing is reducing the band from 4.7 million under 2 to 4 million. That, to me, that's over the long term, that's kind of a no-brainer.
Right. Yeah, that additional 700,000 ends up costing taxpayers $5 million, which is what we discussed. That just doesn't make sense. It's not something that we want to get into.
And obviously, scenario 3, then, I mean, if you look at that, where you're issuing cabs of 7 million, you're paying $52 million of interest. I just tossed that option.
If this was an episode of House Hunters, we would throw that one out first.
That'd be the first one I throw out.
Exactly. So on scenario 2, in essence, what we would be doing is we're locking in that 1 million, but that the convertible is still there as something we're gonna have to work with, along with the 4.7.
Well,
The 2.6.
we would have,
is
we
The
would have,
2.6 will be done?
done. It's a done deal.
if we wanted to be done. Now,
Okay.
if let's say we went that direction and within 10 years,
Values changed.
right?
Well,
like
they
you
should.
said,
Yeah, you can convert that.
we could call those and refinance them.
Okay.
Yeah, best case scenario,
Put more
property
in.
values went
And we can
It's
put more in.
kinda high.
Add some of this in there.
You
Right.
could
But
call
you
those.
can't go the other way.
And
Right.
issue
These
those
aren't gonna
bonds.
come. Yeah, I'm
And
gonna
I
say
should,
scenario
I
two.
should point out, because we're having that conversation, we haven't talked about this. In scenario 1, 95% of those convertible cabs are callable. In this scenario, only just under 80% are callable.
2 million to the 2.6 is
Yeah, it's a,
basically it, right?
Right.
yeah, it's a fair amount.
Yeah.
So what scenario 2 does for us is it gives us probably the best value right now for the tools that we have to work with. And it gives us the most options going forward with that 80% callable appreciation bonds. And then we have to work on, we have a 3-year period to work on the remaining balance.
So essentially, if we went with scenario 2, and we backtracked 2 years, we were dealing with 11.5 million plus interest and fees. So we've gone from $12.5 million down to 5.2. So we've erased 7.3 million of this
Yeah.
grand headache.
With the ability to improve on some of that at the 10-year mark, that part that's tied up in the capital appreciation bonds.
None of it's pretty at this point,
Yeah.
but
It's not- I know.
at least scenario 2,
And we're trying to figure out how to put a
Furthers-
lipstick on a pig, no matter what.
we really don't. But it allows us to address it to the best of our ability right now and still live within not only the spirit, but really the letter of the law with respect to AB 182 on those 4 different parameters. 8%, 30-year, callable after 10, and a 4-to-1 payback. We meet all those criteria with scenario 2. And again, it's nothing's pretty at this point. After Series A and Series B basically took away a lot of our ability to finance. But
In any of these scenarios, does reauthorization go out the north end? Or is it still something that's in there? You wouldn't really need to.
it wouldn't go out the door.
Is it still
The only way that reauthorization goes out of the door is in the one you house owners already kicked away, which is scenario 3.
Okay.
It was this amount here and this amount here. So if we're locking in a little bit on scenario 2 right now, in a year and a half, November of 14, we could do a reauthorization campaign
That's right.
to take this off and replace it with, call it measure whatever. Measure Z would be our second bond measure in SFID. Measure Z could pay off the 5 million, and that would be it.
Right.
And maybe simultaneously, we could reduce Measure J by 10 million or 20 million or something like that. But
I still think that's an option.
it's an
That's a
option.
good point, Lori, because we didn't mention that earlier, as we've kind of been locked right now on trying to find the actual capital resources and cash to retire the remaining debt. But there is still the option, and we buy ourselves the time with the 3 years to take a look at a reauthorization campaign on that remaining debt as well. The Measure J reauthorization.
Well, and I think the measures, like taking these measures today during these times, I'm hoping that in a couple of years when we look back on this, there will be, your campaign will be stronger if you went out saying, look what we've done. Now we're going to take some off the books. We've put this into play. We've met the spirit of the law. Now we're asking you to do this. I just think we'll grow with a lot more credibility if we want to reauthorize.
Right, and I think the simple story, if you will, the simple message out of a decision like the one we're considering now is what Brent outlined earlier, which is we were confronted with about a $12.5 million debt, and through tools and strategies at our disposal, we've taken care of $7.5 million of that debt. And this is where we need the community's help to retire the remaining balance. It shows, like you said, previous to a year ago when we were thinking about reauthorizing, this gives us time and gives us an opportunity to have exhausted other strategies to get that burden to the taxpayer down as small as it can be.
Maybe we have a little lull in the action here. I'd like to also, because we keep kicking around this $2 million in unspent band proceeds, and that doesn't just happen because we hope it happens. It happens because we had a guy, a dean like Eric Middlestead, that when he was told a year ago
We're running out of money.
what was going on, we told him that we'd like to see $1.5 million or so come back to us, to be able to pay this off. And he not only met that, but he got it to $2 million, which was fabulous. And then the other $2 million from the city of Tulare, as you well know, you saw us have to go and negotiate for that money and have documentation. And Harry Towle from Quad Knoth was fabulous, as he always is. And Eric played an instrumental part in helping Stan and I through that negotiation as well. So I just wanted to publicly thank Eric for all your help in that, because that's huge. To have $4 million to pay those bands down right off the top was a huge part of what we're trying to do. So thank you.
I know this is another question we don't like to answer, but how do we address corporate in this whole situation?
Well, we have to think about that. And we have a couple of things that we're working on with Corcoran. One is they're working with their board to review and revisit what their priorities were for actual facilities capital outlay to $1 million. They've done a pretty good job with their facilities. They have fewer facilities needs now than they do other needs. So one of the ideas that they've shared with us is whether or not we would be willing to revisit our memorandum of understanding with them and look at other kinds of support and services they want from College of the Sequoias that they would be willing to quantify and count toward what that $1 million commitment was for facilities. And one of the things that we're working on right now is a matriculation program that they have in place where they're actually wanting to try to get some of our basic level courses, our prerequisite level courses, for example, English 251 and Math 360, offered out there more regularly within the construct of their high school curriculum. And I really like the concept and I like the idea. They're looking at an early start for students who are still in high school. Let's say I'm a junior or a senior at Corcoran High, and I might be a student who would be in need, by the time I graduate from Corcoran High, of taking our English 251 class as a prerequisite to getting into my transfer English. They want to take the 251 and start to offer it to students in their senior year. So that as they finish their senior year at Corcoran High School, they don't have to take a year to remediate. They've done the remediation, if you will, a year in advance, and they can move, theoretically, if they pass, from that class directly into transfer English. By us putting together those partner packages with them, Dr. Lacerna has been working with Dean Stephanie Collier to sit down with Corcoran. I even negotiated the initial concepts with their superintendent and their high school principal. They liked those ideas. What they're willing to do now is we put those kinds of classes in place, is build an MOU around that starts to quantify what the value is of those courses, because we're out there offering them, and start to develop a tab that we're paying toward the $1 million commitment. So that's the idea we have in the works right now. Not to say that they wouldn't come back and at some point still have some desire for a capital outlay or a capital improvement project. But right now they seem to be very willing to take the money in other forms of support and collaboration with COS.
Any more
Okay.
questions I can ask or answer?
Board members, any more questions? So you want us to vote on this, correct?
Yeah, actually, maybe explain, Brent, there's two items to that, I think, right?
Right, we have two different other resolutions.
Right.
Yes.
Two different resolutions. One would be, if we settled on scenario 2, well, I guess either scenario 1 or scenario 2. The first resolution you have is to pay a portion of what we have coming due, pay a portion of that through the sale of GO bonds. So we have a resolution seeking authorization to issue up to $6 million in general obligation bonds. And so if we went with scenario 2 or thereabouts, that would be the neighborhood 3.7 million, 3.8 million is what we would sell under that resolution. The second resolution is for the remaining bond anticipation note. We need a second we could have combined them into one resolution, but we just figured we'd separate them out. The second resolution authorizes us to issue up to $6 million in a 3-year bond anticipation note, essentially for the difference of what we don't get in the general obligation bond that we need to pay off the 2011 bond anticipation note. That makes sense?
Yeah, so, and I noticed it says 6, and I'm not concerned with you doing this, but we're not allowing them up to 6. If we tell you we want the 3.7, we're not allowing, Scott to go to 6, are we?
No, they're only going to sell a combined 8.5 million or so. Combined with the two,
Bands and-
enough to pay off our current bands, less the 4 million that we're gonna pay down ourselves.
Right, okay. Well, I guess, yeah,
We're not gonna issue more than what we need to pay off the bond anticipation notes.
okay.
So
And but the ratio though is, I guess that's my only concern. You're not giving them up to 6 million, are you? Or does this resolution, we're saying here, we're gonna do 3.7 here, because that's, right?
Right.
I mean, is that,
We could, what do you think about a friendly amendment? Can we amend it down?
This was originally set up for action last week. Since then, we've fine-tuned a little. We know we're going to operate under the 6 million, so we didn't change the number because it's set up to 6. But if it makes you all feel comfortable in narrowing the parameters, we can do that now.
I think scenario 2 is pretty clear on staying under 4. I guess I just, right? Is that how I'm reading it? Scenario
Yes.
2 keeps us under 4 million.
In that scenario, I think it would be 4 million on the first resolution, and then 5 million on the second, which is the ban.
I don't know if it's not a big
No.
deal. I'm okay with it. but if it's
The
more
only
comfortable
thing
to
is
vote on
that
something else.
the resolutions you have from our bond attorney, which is David Casanoka, he did them both as 6, just to give the board the flexibility. And so if you're not comfortable
Well,
with that, we can send it back.
as long as I'm clear that what we're approving is something that's consistent with scenario number 2. is
Well,
what-
and maybe that's the way we do both of these, Ken, is we, in the motion, we move to approve the resolutions as presented, consistent with scenario 2 as reviewed at tonight's meeting.
That's what I would.
And that gives us the parameters in any of the documents moving forward to keep it within those confines.
That would be still then.
Okay.
All right, well, I would move that we adopt resolution 2013-14 with the change that it be consistent with scenario number 2 as presented today.
Okay, it's been moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, it was moved by Ken, seconded by Earl. Megan, can you please poll the board?
Trustee Uez?
Aye.
Trustee Morris?
Aye.
Trustee Elmore?
Aye.
Trustee Featherston?
Aye. Okay, moving on to item number 2. I don't know if we need any further discussion. Frank, anything else to add? Anybody have any questions? Do I have a motion to approve resolution 2013-15 with the same amendment as resolution 2013-14?
So moved.
Moved by Ken,
Second.
seconded by John. Megan, please press
Trustee
forward.
Uez?
Aye.
Trustee Elmore?
Aye.
Trustee Webb?
Aye.
Trustee Featherston?
Aye. All right, motion passes, both of them. I see no further items on the agenda. Does anybody in the audience have any questions or comments? Steve, I just hear a chuckle.
Lori?
Yes.
Brett, is AB 182 in suspense?
Well, I know it's being authored right now. There are negotiations with the intent of it becoming law in January. Now, whether that means it's expense, I'm not familiar with the process.
They expect it adopted this year and to take effect January 1?
Yes.
That's what we're
Yes.
told, yes.
And what committee is it in?
Do you know which committee?
I don't.
You just read that. I don't.
I'll look into it.
Further comments? appreciate all the work you've done.